This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Democratic pollster Celinda Lake says the top issue on the political horizon isn't the economy or education, but rather which crazy thing Republicans will do next. Former World Bank executive and author George Tyler answers the question, what went wrong with the U.S. economy? And Bill Press talks with Congressman Steve Israel of New York. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Pollster Celinda Lake thinks Democrats are too responsible and cooperative when it comes to talking policy. She says we need to concentrate more on messaging and fighting whatever crazy thing Republicans think of next. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, serving as tactician and senior advisor to the National Party committees, dozens of Democratic incumbents, and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. She is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women candidates and on framing issues to women voters. Celinda Lake, welcome to americasdemocrats.org.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. How is President Obama doing in your public opinion surveys? What are the key issues that are hurting or helping him?
Well, President Obama is doing mixed. People like him a lot, but they are worried about the job that he's doing. And it bounces around from a couple of points up to a couple of points down in terms of his job approval ratings. The biggest factor out there is that people are so polarized. Democrats think that he is completely doing a good job, and we respect so much the absolute impossibility of the fights that he is conducting. Republicans are very polarized against the president, and then you have independents who swing back and forth in between. What's key here is that Washington seems bogged down. And what helps the president is he seems to be the only one doing anything. I mean, voters' ratings of Congress are record low. Voters' ratings of the Republicans in Congress are significantly more negative than voters' ratings of the president. That said, I think there are two things that need to happen, and I think the president's trying as hard as he can to get them to happen. One is that we need to get something done. Voters really want to see some movement here, and the president's trying to be a responsible leader and negotiator, but in some ways I think it would be easier for us to get this message out if we were talking about, okay, here we have the votes. We'll deliver these votes. Where are you? And really took it to the Republicans more. And then the second thing is the current emphasis on immigration, ACA, all important issues, drowning out any messaging on the economy. And we do need to see more messaging on the economy. Voters are still, particularly blue-collar voters, but voters in general, extremely worried about the economy still, don't feel like it's in recovery. And I think we need to be able to get more message out on the economy and take more action on the economy.
I would like to see a lot of improvement in the messaging from Democrats personally. I think that has really lacked. Let's talk Obamacare.
You know, you make that, I think you're making a very good point, and I'd like to follow up on that.
Yeah, please, sure, absolutely.
We're still in, we are too responsible. And in the long run, in the long run it may be all right, but in the short run it hurts us. And we are being very responsible. We are being cooperative. We are talking policy, and we should be messaging more, and I think you're really right on that.
Well, and along those lines, so my next question was going to be about Obamacare, and here's where really I think it is underscored. How and why did the public change from really pretty strong support for Obamacare to flat-out opposition in just a couple of years? I mean, is it more than just the messaging? I mean, what's going on there?
It was, some of it was the messaging. Some of it is change is always scary. I think Obamacare, in retrospect, we took too long with it, and we didn't, and we let them get out ahead on messaging, and we were too responsible. We tried to answer in terms of, the reality, as opposed to thinking about the same kinds of answers that the Republicans are giving. So my favorite example of that is, on death panels. We tried to responsibly say there are no death panels here. This doesn't have death panels. What if Michelle Obama had gotten up and said, okay, listen, my mother lives with us in the White House. Do you think this guy would be getting to the third floor of the White House if he had a death panel in his health care plan? That would have ended it. I mean, that's the kind of messaging we need. But we are always, frankly, too responsible. We're always the ones talking message and reason, and sometimes we just need to position things. And I think that when you think about the fights that we've won, we've done it because we've had messaging. So we won the fight, at least temporarily, on the privatization of Social Security because we said, you want to turn your Social Security over to Wall Street. Doesn't sound like a very good idea to me. We said we won the fight on, at least temporarily, on increasing taxes on the corporations because we released reports that said X, Y, and Z corporations, GE, Verizon, are paying no taxes. Did you get away? And in fact, some of these got a rebate from the government. Did you get away with paying no taxes last year? And did you make $12 billion in profits? So I think that we do need more messaging, and ACA is a great example of us being focused on the policy and not enough on the messages that actually get the policies passed.
And we're speaking with Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists here today on americasdemocrats.org. Now, Democrats seem to be at a disadvantage going into the 2014 Senate elections. What are the key races as you see it?
Oh, well, I don't know if we're at a disadvantage, but we definitely have a great deal of exposure. So we have incumbents that won in years that Barack Obama helped get the turnout up, and now we have to go get that vote ourselves. We have incumbents that won in very tough seats, like the Montana Senate race, the Alaska Senate race. We have also some retirements of some of our most, frankly, beloved office holders, Michigan, Iowa with Tom Harkin and Carl Levin. And so we have a lot of exposure, and we have, we're spread thin, and we also have some very tough seats to defend. I still think that we will maintain control of the Senate, and I think we're up to it, but it's going to take Democrats focusing on making sure that these races are well-funded and that we support our Democrats, even if we don't agree with them 100% on all of the issues. The other thing, though, I'd like to flag is I still believe we have to take back the House. And the House has done a spectacular job of recruiting great candidates. Nancy Pelosi, the head of the DCCC, they have done just an amazing job of recruiting really stellar candidates. But with so many Senate races, often the House races come up short on the money. And we've got to make sure that just as we went back to our pocketbooks again and again to support Barack Obama, that we make sure the House races as well as the Senate races are funded.
In your opinion, can the Democrats take the House back in 2014?
We can, if we recruit good candidates, which we've done, fund those campaigns, and get out the vote.
Okay. What issues are on the horizon that maybe we don't even recognize right now that Democrats can seize the initiative on?
Well, I'll be honest with you. If you had called me up in the beginning of 2012 and said, okay, I've got the strategy for winning. We're going to have the Republicans redefine race, try to ban Planned Parenthood, try to ban abortion, talk about birth control, say you can't get pregnant if you're raped, and then redefine rape again, I would have said, you really got to stop drinking on the job. Great idea, but it'll never happen. In point of fact, it did. So the issue that's not even on the horizon, I think, and I only mean it somewhat facetiously, is what crazy thing they're going to say. And who would have thought that the head of their anti-abortion bills who come out with something as insane as you can't get pregnant if you're raped, and, of course, was replaced now by a woman in their caucus. Apparently Republicans don't understand biology very well, as well as math and a lot of other things. So the craziest issue is going to be the one they're going to come out with. The second thing, some of the things that I think are on the horizon will be taxation issues. Who would have thought we'd be in a time when Democrats would be running on taxes? But we have good things to say on taxes, particularly on corporations paying their fair share, offshore tax shelters. Benedict Arnold is what the voters call it. And then the economy. And finally, education. I mean, if you had said to me, honestly, a year ago that Corbett, when he was up for re-election, would lay off 20,000 teachers and education professionals, those 25 schools in Philadelphia, and cut over $1 billion from education, I would say there's no way they're that crazy. They are that crazy. And so education is really soaring as an issue. It's a great issue for Democrats, a great issue for women Democrats, and I think you'll see that emerge as a big issue in 2014 as well.
So we look forward to who puts their foot in their mouth first.
There you go, exactly right.
All right, Celinda Lake, one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Celinda, thanks so much for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Economist George Tyler analyzes what went wrong with the economy and says the answer is that Americans stop being paid for their productivity. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
As the people of Colorado are presently learning, it's horrendous enough to suffer the ravages of a natural disaster, but it's doubly horrific to then be faced with a more devastating unnatural disaster. First came the epic floods that recently ripped through the Front Range, tearing up towns, roads, waterways, mountain homes and businesses, farms and lives. Just awful. But now comes the added horror of unknown levels of poisonous contaminants pouring out of many of the thousands of fracking sites that pock this area. Big oil frackers were already notorious in Boulder and Weld counties for the environmental, health, and economic damage being done by this ravaging method of forcing gas out of rock deep under Earth's surface. Now, though, the corporate wells, tanks, ponds, and all the other parts of their fracking infrastructure have been swamped by a tsunami of floodwater and destructive debris. Even in the chaos of people scrambling to get out of the flood's way and to secure their property, many residents were so alarmed by seeing this mess of flooded wells, overturned tanks of highly toxic chemicals and wastewater, and ruptured lines that they paused to take pictures and videos. They then posted these on websites and Facebook pages to document this unexpected threat of widespread long-term damage from fracking contaminants and to alert neighbors to the danger. This is Jim Hightower saying, after all, the frackers themselves were not telling the public about this unfolding disaster. The big media outlets were curiously incurious about it, and regulators were also silent. So, like the pamphleteers of old, the people formed their own network of communication, and they've now turned it into a citizens' action network. To see some of their photos, videos, and actions, go to www.facebook.com/East Boulder County United.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. The American economy has experienced considerable growth in the last 30 years, but virtually none of this growth has trickled down to the average American. Economist and author George Tyler explains why. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, George Tyler is an economist who was an aide to Senators Hubert Humphrey and Lloyd Bentsen and was a deputy Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration before joining the World Bank. He has just written a book called What Went Wrong? How the 1% Hijacked the American Middle Class and What Other Countries Got Right. George Tyler, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Now, even President Obama now talks all the time about the American dream receding. To ask the same question that's in the title of your new book, what went wrong?
Well, the central problem is that Americans began around the Reagan administration to cease to be paid for their rising productivity. Productivity kept going up, but wages went flat. And when you include the rising cost of necessities like health care, college, real incomes for families have, on average, declined or certainly no better than stayed stagnant. Then a recession hit, and the typical American today not only earns no more than his or her father or mother did 30 years ago, but family wealth is back at 1983 levels also. That translates into an entire generation of toil and savings wasted. In addition, retirements are less secure, jobs are less secure. That's the sobering record of Reaganomics. I think America can do better. And my book explains that we need to look abroad for lessons on how other rich democracies, who we now have learned have leapfrogged us economically, have succeeded where we failed. What happened is that Washington, beginning in 1981, began to disassemble the institutions responsible for creating the post-war years through the 1970s of the greatest middle class in history. Institutions supporting rising wages like rising minimum wages, good public schools, employers who viewed employees and profits as equally important, labor unions, jobs at home rather than overseas, and regulations that enabled employees to organize and attain higher wages, all those important institutions were unraveled. That was the essence of Reaganomics. Shareholder capitalism came to replace stakeholder capitalism. Windfall CEO compensation derived from rising profits took priority over everything else, and CEOs became willing and, more importantly, able, thanks to stock options, to compress wages, to export jobs, to cut R&D and investment. In the post-war years, until the 1970s, Americans became convinced that we were special, that the normal rules of greed didn't apply to us. A fortuitous set of circumstances in the 50s through the 70s created that large middle class. That changed with the switch in attitudes in corporate executive suites, with executives focusing mostly on boosting next quarter's earnings in order to earn stock option rewards. Adam Smith warned against greed, arguing that government needed to regulate the economy to channel greed.
What would you recommend to policymakers to restore the middle class and the entire economy?
Well, the only proven pathway to restore the middle class is to follow the tried and true prescriptions from other rich democracies like Australia and Germany. That means going back to what worked in the U.S. during the post-war era, but to do so by creating institutions to ensure that the gains from productivity growth are enjoyed by everyone, not just the 1%. These other nations have figured out how to grow prosperity broadly, how to ensure that employees and employers share the gains from growth as determined by productivity. and how to maximize the gains from a vibrant and free world trade regime, how to upskill their workforces to keep them competitive in the global economy, and how to run companies that are better prepared than U.S. ones are for the challenges of the future. Investment and productivity growth is higher in Northern Europe and has been for 30 years. Wages are higher there too, despite taking an average of 6 weeks off. That's why those nations now have the same level of productivity on the factory floor as the U.S. They've overtaken us. So we have a choice, the same choice facing Franklin Roosevelt when he confronted the Great Depression. Either do nothing or look around for ideas from elsewhere that seem to be working. That's why we adopted Social Security, minimum wages, and other policies from Australia and Europe in the 1930s. And we can solve today's problems in the same fashion, looking around at other nations to see what's working better there. If we don't choose these successful models from abroad, the future will be no different for the millennials and Generation X as it's been for their parents, the baby boomers. Without change, we're stuck in an economic system where the gains from growth flow upward, and will continue to do so until voters decide otherwise. The problem isn't that solutions don't exist. The problem is that they require major changes that the 1% will vigorously oppose. They've come to view their monopoly on the gains from growth as something akin to an entitlement. And they have a political system where money is determinate, and they have it. Moreover, they seem unbothered by the slow economic growth we have today. Not that it matters to most families, because they don't see any of the gains from growth anyway, because their real wages are stagnant.
You date the period of the greatest ever growth in the economy as lasting from 1946 to 1972. That coincides with the maturing of the first baby boomers. Is there a connection?
Well, not really. The conditions for a prosperous economy where wages rose with productivity gains was in place after World War II. And that is what produced the great middle class. That points up what can happen in the future if we do institute reforms. We can reproduce that golden age again for the millennials if we adopt these examples and the lessons from Australia and Germany.
Conservative voices, like the Wall Street Journal editorial page, argue that progressives only want to spread the wealth, not create new wealth. So what's the answer to that?
Well, that's a rather disingenuous argument for folks like that to make. Compared to how income was distributed back in the 1980s when President Reagan took office, Reaganomics has produced a gargantuan income redistribution every year of $750 billion away from wages and salaries to corporate profits and to the 1%ers. The share of GDP going to wages and salaries has fallen about 5 percentage points since then, while the share going to corporate profits has risen by more than that. That's an enormous income redistribution. It's comparable in volume each year to 3/4 of the amount that OPEC earns from its global energy sales. That's an enormous income redistribution. Another way to look at this is that productivity rises pretty slowly year after year. In the past, the benefits of that growth went to those responsible for the growth, with both wages and profits rising. But under Reaganomics, that changed. The gains from rising productivity has gone mostly to the 1%, just to employers rather than to everyone else responsible also for that growth, particularly employees. That's not how things worked out in the U.S. in the post-war era, and it's not how it works today in the rich democracies overseas. So the argument of these conservatives is rather like a grade school bully takes your lunch and then complains to the teacher about you wanting to redistribute food when you want it back. The reality is that conservatives are quite pleased with events during the Reagan era and will say or do whatever it takes to shield those gains from being unwound by reforms in regulations and taxes, and about creating wealth. Well, productivity growth has fallen below Northern Europe for 3 decades. And so the supporters of Reaganomics are best advised to talk about something else. Their record, despite sharp tax cuts, is a very poor one. The less they bring up the whole issue of generating wealth, the better off they are. What we need to do is to take steps to boost productivity growth in order to generate faster growth and new wealth creation, while also making certain that the gains from that better productivity growth are broadcasted widely. We need to do both, and folks in other rich democracies have figured out how to accomplish that.
Before we let you go, what lessons can we learn from the family capitalism countries, such as Australia, Denmark, Germany, Sweden?
Well, the choice we have is to move forward in improving the prospects for our children. Baby boomers are a write-off. Generation Xers becoming so. Reforms are needed to change these dynamics. And the lessons from overseas are important in providing a lighted pathway ahead, just as they were in the Great Depression. Reforms on how wages are set by adopting the Australian wage mechanism, and reforms how corporations are governed to boost job creation at home, wage growth, and to make U.S. firms better able to survive the rigors of global competition are needed. U.S. management has become better in recent decades at dodging taxes and exporting high-value jobs than in doing the grunt work of raising productivity year in and year out. Those lessons include job upskilling by employers. Back before the era of globalization, the U.S. had a workforce that was more skilled based on international studies than many European economies like France. But after 2 decades of Reaganomics, that's no longer true. The workforces in every Northern European nation are now more skilled than the U.S. workforce. It isn't that U.S. employees have slacked off and not taken training and become more educated. They have. The problem is that U.S. firms have been exporting those skilled jobs abroad while also refusing to upskill their U.S. workforce. Why? Well, let's look to Siemens to understand why. The German engineering company spends about $200 million a year on apprenticeships, the seed corn for a productive workforce for that firm in the future. In contrast, U.S. firms don't spend much on training, not like European companies. And the reason is revealed by Siemens' document showing that about 1/3 of their apprenticeship costs are not recovered. U.S. firms worried about next quarter's earnings simply refuse to spend that money, even if the payoff is lush. We have the same problem with weak R&D by U.S. corporations. The syndrome is called short-termism. It's why U.S. investment is weak, U.S. R&D is weak, and U.S. wages have stagnated. U.S. management worries about the next 3 months, not the next 3 years or the next 3 decades. Adam Smith wrote about this precise problem in describing how the East India officials of the 18th century in India mismanaged business, lining their own pockets at the expense of the company. They were capable folks, just facing the wrong incentive structure. The U.S. has the same problem today. Very capable management that faces the wrong incentive structure. Their boards of directors allow them to focus on next quarter's earnings, not the long term. Changing the board composition is the only proven way to end short-termism and all of the other problems, including stagnant wages, that follow.
Okay. George Tyler, economist, and the author of What Went Wrong, How the 1% Hijacked the American Middle Class and What Other Countries Got Right. George, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you very much.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Congressman Steve Israel, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
We are heading to a real showdown, it looks like, again, here in our nation's capital, over the budget and the debt ceiling. Joining us in studio, a man right in the middle of it, Congressman Steve Israel, representing parts of Long Island here, at any rate. I'm not sure exactly. What's your district number, Congressman?
3. Congress, from the Whitestone Bridge in Queens to the Nissequag River in Smithtown.
He's got it down.
There you go.
That's his district. He's also chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, working for all of us around the country. And John Nichols, Washington bureau chief, correspondent, whatever.
I write about politics.
The Nation magazine, here in studio as a friend of Bill this hour. So, Congressman, show of leadership yesterday on the part of Speaker John Boehner, right? Saying it's a bad idea to even think about shutting the government down because of Obamacare, but we're going to do it anyway.
Right. Yeah. Every time that Speaker Boehner has had a choice between moving the country forward and working with Democrats or caving into his right-wing lunatic fringe, he's selected option B, cave into the right-wing lunatic fringe. That's not leadership. He's more concerned with keeping the gavel than he is keeping the economy running.
That's exactly it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's his job that's more important, or than keeping the country going.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. He is a captive of the Tea Party, and that is why, another day, another showdown, another day, another crisis. These people are just incapable of getting consensus and moving the country forward.
Yesterday, President Obama went before the Business Roundtable. A couple of hours before he got there, the Business Roundtable, leaders of the major corporations in this country passed a resolution saying, bad idea. To shut down the government. Bad idea not to raise the debt ceiling. Just do it, right? Telling Republicans to do that. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has told Republicans, raise the debt ceiling. Stop playing games. The Wall Street Journal has said, this is wrong. These are voices that Republicans usually listen to.
Yeah.
No more?
No, they are in a right-wing fantasy land. They just don't listen. They only listen to themselves in this bubble. They listen to themselves at the Tea Party caucus. They listen to themselves rant and rave, in their individual meetings. But they're not listening to the American people. They're not even listening to their constituents.
I wanted to offer this notion, though. I think for years we've been saying it's time that we have some people in Congress who stand up to corporations and say no. Who thought it was going to be the right wing of the Republican Party?
I know.
No, but it is.
But here's the deal, though, and because John has written this book of Dollarocracy about money and politics,
Fine holiday gift.
I'm going to read it.
Do you think, and this really gets to your other hat, right? I mean, so do you think if the Tea Party, and they're going through with this strategy, and Boehner's gone along with them, but the corporations are still going to give their money to these Republicans, aren't they? Isn't that the problem?
Well, I hope that they have a change of heart and a change of mind, because if you take a look at what these Republicans are doing to the economy, if you take a look at what they're willing to do to businesses, to corporations, to middle-class families, to working families, all in the interest of pursuing their relentless ideology, they are a bad deal for America. They're a bad deal for the business community. And so I hope that the business community will use this as a reason to reassess their own relentless support of an agenda that works against the interests of our economy.
I mean, every one of these corporations, John, would be damaged, right?
Well, I think that we have to understand, and the congressman knows this because he's one of the savvier people up there. When we talk about the corporate community, we talk about the business community, frankly, when we talk about wealthy donors, there are sectors within. Not everybody's on the same page. Many visionary people who are very, very wealthy donate to the Democratic Party, right? So it's not if one side or the other, either or. But what has happened, and what I do think is a real challenge here, is that I think you have a portion of the Republican Party, perhaps a majority of the House caucus, which has decided that they can do this in an off-year election. They can bring the government to a standstill. I don't think this would be happening if next year was a presidential year. I think that then the power within the party would be bringing down a bigger hammer. But my bet is that what they're betting is they can create crisis and hoping a low turnout 2014, they'll slide through.
You know, I wish I could agree with your analysis.
Well, it's okay
I would have
if you
hope.
don't.
I would have more hope. But
Yeah.
you know, these people are just relentless, and many of them go back to districts that have been redistricted to the right. Not enough for them to maintain the majority necessarily, but many of them go back to their districts and they go back to their own Tea Party followers, and they believe what they hear. They're in an echo chamber. They come back and they really believe that the United States of America, most Americans and most businesses would be willing to shut down the economy in order to defund Obamacare. They are true believers. God bless them. Many of these people are true believers.
And what you're saying is that this is actually that our hope would be cynicism.
Meaning,
so that if they were just cynics doing this, you could maybe get it through.
If my
but if they
hope
really
would be,
believe
right,
it,
that's right. That's right. I would have some hope if this was a political strategy. It is not. It is an ideology, which means our only hope is to replace them. Is to elect 17 more Democrats in the House of Representatives to take this majority back and put this country back on a course of common sense.
Tell us how long have you been in Congress?
Since 2000. 2001.
Okay,
I was
so
elected
you were
in
not
2000.
there in 1994.
No,
right?
but I watched it on TV.
Right. I wonder whether some of these Republicans recognize the danger to the country, to the economy, to their party, if they shut down the government, as happened in 1994.
Can I tell you a story about that?
Please.
Bill, there are some places on Capitol Hill where you can run into a Tea Party Republican and try and have an honest conversation. Not many places, but some places. And so I was talking to a former congressman, a Tea Party congressman from Illinois that was defeated. And I said to him, you know what, do you remember the lessons of 1994? Your constituents want you to compromise. They want you to meet us halfway. If you don't do that, we will beat you. And this is what he said. I know you may beat me, but I will bring this government down with me. Now, how do you negotiate with somebody like that? So they don't care about the lessons of 1994. They care about their relentless ideology. You know why they want a government shutdown? Because they don't believe in government. That's what this is about. And so there is no hope when you're dealing with people like that.
You wonder why they ran for Congress if they don't believe in government.
Well, they like all the benefits of government. They like being on the federal employee health benefits plan. They like all that stuff. They like the swag. They just don't believe that the government should be helping middle class families. By the way, they love a government that will fund $40 billion in subsidies to the richest oil companies on earth. They love a government that actually gives them subsidies for the farms. I'm talking about personal subsidies because many of them own farms. That government is fine, but a government that wants to help families with supplemental nutrition assistance, no good. A government that wants Americans to decide on their health care rather than big insurance companies, put it out of business.
Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro was there in that seat yesterday. She told us about, if I can only remember his name, a congressman from Tennessee, Kinsley or something.
I'm not sure,
Okay. Who wants to eliminate the food stamp program because there are too many cheats on welfare. Fincher.
Yes.
Wants to eliminate food stamps, right? He gets $3.5 million in crop subsidies every year for his ranch.
Yeah, government's great then, isn't it? By the way, there are over 10 of them. 10 of them voted to take supplemental nutrition assistance out of the Farm Bill because they don't believe that the Farm Bill should be funding poor people, but they receive a check from the federal government in subsidies for significant amounts of money for their own farms. How is that defensible?
And you ask about the '94 class too.
Yeah,
I covered that class, and I covered those people. And you can say this about Newt Gingrich: he was interested in government. Mm-hmm. He was ultimately. He may want to change it fundamentally. And those people who came in were his acolytes. They were people he had trained up. Mm-hmm. It's a very different world now. I do think that the congressman is right on this. That you could go to these people and say, well, remember what happened in '94 and stuff like that. They actually, you talk to them, and I've talked to the chief. They will say those are sellouts. Those weren't real believers.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, what do the American people understand, and how would you have them understand what would happen if, in fact, we do not lift the debt ceiling and let the government default?
Well, actually, the American people do. There was just a poll over the past 24 hours, a national poll. A majority of the American people understand that not lifting the debt ceiling would seriously harm the economy. They also understand that when we're talking about the debt ceiling, we're not talking about new spending. We're talking about spending that members of Congress have racked up, including farm subsidies for themselves, that they now don't want to pay the bill for. I have to pay my credit cards. Your listeners have to pay their credit cards. Why should the United States government not have to pay the bills that the United States Congress racked up? That's what this is about.
That's really what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
At the end of the month, you get that thing. Here's all the stuff that you spent. Now you got to pay for it.
Right.
Well, Congress says, "Oh no, we spent it all, but we ain't going to pay for it."
Mm-hmm.
We should throw into the mix here that you've read the bill. This is not just about debt ceiling in Obama. This has got Keystone Pipeline
stuff. They put Keystone in there. They put all this other stuff, that all these little ideological trinkets they pin to this bill. Yeah. So this is a game.
Here we go. Armageddon. Starting to sound like it, isn't it? Congressman Steve Israel in studio with us. Your questions, your comments, welcome if you figure out a way out of this mess. And Congressman... Whoa, good deal.
I'm not really making the run.
I just elevated you. It starts right here.
I like that.
John Nichols from The Nation in studio with us as well. We'll be right back.
This is the Bill Press Show.
Here we go, 13 minutes before the top of the hour. We're blessed to have in studio with us at this time Congressman Steve Israel from the state of New York and head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And with us from The Nation magazine as a friend of Bill, John Nichols. Congressman, I want to ask you, some of us were a little shocked, if not annoyed, when Vladimir Putin, the president of Israel, put an op-ed in the New York Times. President of Russia, what am I saying? Op-ed in the New York Times, kind of teaching us how to run our country and telling us everything that we were doing wrong and everything President Obama was doing wrong. You responded,
I did,
to him in a Russian magazine.
I did.
What kind of response? What did you say, and what kind of response did you get?
Well, I wanted to test the proposition that the right of free expression is a two-way street, and look. I understand people were annoyed with Putin's piece. I took it as an opportunity. If he could talk to the American people, why can't American government officials talk to the people of Russia? I never thought I would actually pen an op-ed that said, "People of Russia, may I address you?" And to my surprise, although I was later somewhat disappointed, the newspaper Kommersant accepted my op-ed, where I talked about my own feelings on Syria and the exceptional thing that our two countries can do. The translation, however, left a little to be desired.
No kidding.
So, for example, I wrote I was fascinated by Mr. Putin's article in the New York Times, and it was written in Kommersant as I was delighted by President Putin's piece in the New York Times. Fascinated, delighted, I guess it's up to interpretation. But the fact is that they did run the piece, and I'm thankful that they did.
And tell us some of the things you said, except for folks, just give us a sense of some of the things you wanted to communicate to the Russian people.
Well, the most important thing that I wanted to communicate is Mr. Putin's criticism of the president for talking about American exceptionalism.
Yes.
I talked about the fact that as an American, I do believe my country is exceptional and has done exceptional things. I also know that Russia and the United States together have accomplished many exceptional things. We explored space together. We defeated the Nazis together. And if we could work together to rid the world of chemical weapons...
a lot of nuclear weapons together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we can create that partnership and eliminate the threat of chemical weapons being used against children in Syria or elsewhere in the world, we could add that to the list of exceptional things and ask that Mr. Putin put turn his words into deed.
Now, how's this for a segue? The world would be a better place if Russia and the United States could work together on Syria, getting rid of the nuclear weapons. The world would be a better place if Democrats can take back control of the House.
Oh, I love that.
In 2014.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us how you're going to do it.
We have a path. We need 17 seats to take the majority and change the direction of the Congress.
Which sounds like a lot, but it's not.
It's not really. 435 seats in Congress. We need 17
about 5%.
To paraphrase Winston Churchill, never in the history of humankind has so little meant so much. 17 seats, gets us out of this gridlock and obstructionism. We have 52 districts in play. We need 17. 52 Republican districts in play. We will defend about 25, 26 Democratic incumbents in fairly challenging districts. Our recruiting has gone exceptionally well. We continue to beat the Republicans in fundraising, and our message is working very well. Our message is working not because we're that good necessarily, but because the Republicans are that bad. 67% of voters in swing districts have a negative view of their Republican member of Congress. That is very significant. 40% of Republicans in those districts do not believe that House Republicans are doing enough to cooperate. And so that's the environment in which we find ourselves.
Can I ask you one question? And you'll know this. The 52 districts that you're talking about, how many of them voted for President Obama?
There are about, it overlaps, but there are about 17 districts that voted for the president. There are about close to 20 districts where 48% of those districts voted for the president.
It's an ironic number, isn't it?
Yeah,
17
it sure is.
There.
Yeah.
It's 17 districts that voted for President Obama, and they need 17 seats.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a path, Jonathan, there's a path.
So it's 52 Republican districts, and and then you're defending.
And we're defending. Well, there's 52. We're in offense in 52 Republican districts, and then we'll be in defense in about 25, 26 Democratic districts. But I'll tell you, our Democratic incumbents, they have all the tools. They're doing the right thing. They're working in their districts, and they are they're leaders who have reasonable, common sense solutions to the nation's problems, and that's what their constituents want.
But if you look, that we really were moving forward. Anything that this president has accomplished, he accomplished in the first 2 years when Democrats had control of the House and Senate, right?
Well, think about it, yeah.
Yeah, and since 2010, it's just been gridlock or downhill.
This is the least productive Congress in the history of the Congress. Think about the first day that the Democrats had the majority. We passed the Lilly Ledbetter Act that said that a woman shouldn't be paid less than for the same work as a man. Last day we passed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In between, we did so much. We passed the Affordable Care Act. We bolstered consumer protections. We lowered the rate on student loans. It was a robust several years. Robust not in pursuit of ideology, which is what the Republicans are doing. Robust in pursuit of growing the middle class and working families. You compare what we did to what they're doing, there's no comparison.
It's so important to get that back. I'm going to have to ask you to hold that thought because we're just out of time.
I filibustered.
No, you didn't.
I'm sorry.
Not at all.
DCCC.org, right?
Yes, DCCC.org.
You can find out more about which races, where you can help out. Congressman Steve Israel, thank you for the great job you're doing.
Bill.
Thanks for coming in this morning.
Read your book.
Thank you.
All right. John Nichols, good
Honored,
man,
my friend.
great friend. Thank you so much for coming in. Dollarocracy. Check it out. We got a link on our website.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Celinda Lake, George Tyler, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to